Good morning. There was a woman who was invited to play a board game with her 12-year-old daughter and two of her friends, and it was the board game Clue, which I know people tell me now was on video and all that, the video games and all, but remember the general gist of it was, you try to solve a murder, in this big mansion, and so the woman's kind of like vaguely remembered the rules, but she sat down and they're kind of distributing the pieces and all, and then she's trying to be the gracious host. She said, "Well, why don't you start?" And everybody's like, "Oh, she can't start. She's not the character Miss Scarlet. Miss Scarlet is always the one who starts." And Pam's like, "Oh, sorry about that." And then they start laying out all of the various rules. And she's like, "Well, how do you know these are the rules?" And they pull out the instruction manual, which shows these are the rules. And Pam had to kind of chuckle and thought, how many of us follow the rules even though we haven't really thought them through and agreed to them in the first place? There are very various basic assumptions that we build during our lives, basic attitudes sometimes that we build towards in our lives, and it affects our experience. So how many of us have bought into those old rules? And what if life is a game? What if life is a game? What if the game is that at the beginning you agreed to completely forget that you are a spiritual being having a human experience? And part of the game was to once again realize that that's the situation, and that we can indeed use our thoughts, our spoken words, to create things in the world. That's why I think Harry Potter and those things just resonate with us, because yes, there is a spiritual truth underlying that idea. For the recent weeks, we've been reading the book E Squared. I'm going to have John put up the slide there. This is actually our last week of kind of talking about this book. It was written by Pam Grout, who actually goes to the Unity Church up in Lawrence, Kansas. And she's a very successful author and screenwriter, and she came up with this idea of how can we bring the Unity message to a broader audience, and how could I actually use the scientific method to prove to people that these spiritual principles work? And so she came up with 9 experiments. And if you've missed any of the previous lessons, it's no problem. This lesson will stand on its own. They are posted on our web page, unitytampa.org, at the bottom of the page. And we also have them on our Facebook page, archived there. This last experiment, this last chapter, is chapter number 9. It's called the Fish and Loaves experiment. The universe is limited. Limited. The universe is limitless, abundant, and strangely accommodating. But the basic assumption of most people is that it is limited, and that there isn't enough to go around, etc., etc. So I'm going to have John put up the next slide. Here are for like 4 basic things she talks about in this chapter. And it's always good for us to recognize, and that is, who says there isn't enough? Who says there isn't enough? Anyone who has really just taken time to sit down and examine it, there's more than enough building materials for everybody to have a comfortable home or domicile in this world. There's more than enough food to go around. It's more of a distribution problem that we've got. But we're immersed in this misperception that there's not enough. And so we act out of fear rather than love. And it doesn't matter if you are rich or poor. I've heard people who are wealthy talk about just being afraid that they're going to lose it all. And yet there are people who are poor that are just know that all they need to do is to just have all the money they could possibly think about, and everything will be okay. Well, not if you've got certain assumptions and attitudes. In this book, E Squared, Pam Grout talks about life is a game of musical chairs. And you're afraid, of course, that when the music stops, that you won't be able to find a chair. When in reality, there are more than enough chairs to go around. She also mentions a journalist who was interviewing a wealthy man who's launching a new product, and she just was kind of struck by his resonance of greed. And she said, and so she wrote, noticing the rabid dollar signs in his eyes, she asked him if there was a certain profit margin or a success index or a dollar amount of some kind that he would consider to be enough. And the business owner just stopped for a moment, sighed, and scoffed and said, "You just don't get it. There's never enough." Yet I contrast that story with one I had heard about of a conservative broadcast reporter who was over in Germany interviewing this wealthy German businessman. And at one point, the reporter was talking about, people complain about the tax rate here in the United States. And he asked the German businessman, "Well, how much of your income do you pay in taxes?" And the businessman thought, "Oh, I think it's about 60% of my income." And the conservative reporter was just, "You've got to be kidding me. 60%? Why do you put up with that?" And the German businessman tried to change the subject, but the conservative reporter continued on. And finally, the German businessman, he says, "I don't want to be a rich man in a poor country. We have all of our health care paid for. People can go to college and get a PhD provided they can pass the entrance exams. People know that they would always have some place to live if they're out of luck." And it strikes me the difference between these two businessmen. They have different basic assumptions, different values, I guess is a better way to put it. In his 1981 book, Critical Path, Buckminster Fuller made an interesting comment. He said he looks at the world's wealth, but he also looks at the world's potential and the world's productivity. At that point, there were 4 billion people on Earth. And he said, the way I look at it is we have 4 billion billionaires. Well, the population of the Earth is now at 7.6 billion, so even if we did the math, that means that each one of us, in his mind, should have $2.1 billion worth of resources at our disposal. So what's the balance in your checkbook this morning? Number 2, sacrifice our sacrifice. We make the mistake of thinking that we need to really sacrifice the things that we need or the things that we love. And again, that comes out of some of these other religious traditions, when in reality, the idea behind sacrifice is to let go of the things that aren't working for you anymore. Being willing to free things that need to be freed in our lives. Be able to cross out that which doesn't work for us, which is the symbolism of the crucifixion. To be able to just cross out an old system that doesn't work for us anymore. Eric Butterworth wrote, "We're told that we need to wait on the Lord, but the word that was translated as wait comes from the root word that means to bind together. It's not a question of time, but a depth of consciousness. Expect to be guided and then get in motion." So instead of wait on the Lord, it's like come together with the Lord, understand the Lord at a deeper level. So recognize that the things you love to do, the things you do better than anybody else, that's your divine purpose. You may have more than one, but the important thing is that somehow in your life you are expressing what it is you really love to do. That's what you're here on the earth to do. That's what's going to make this world a better place. Number 3, the rules. Change the rules. Obviously, at the beginning I mentioned the board game Clue, but one movie scene that has really stuck with me over the years is from the 1982 movie Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And as the thing opens, we see the crew of the Enterprise, but there's a different captain instead of William Shatner or James T. Kirk. And they're getting a distress call from a ship that's in the neutral zone. Now, the neutral zone has been set up between them and the Klingon Empire, and there's a treaty that neither side will enter the neutral zone, or if they do, they can be attacked. So the young captain is kind of, oh boy, what should I do, sort of a thing, and so she decides, let's go ahead and go into the neutral zone and save that ship. And once they go into the neutral zone, all of a sudden, 3 Klingon vessels are upon them, and it appears that perhaps this distress call was actually fake. But suddenly, the ship is being seized, and then suddenly we find out this is actually a simulator at the Starfleet Academy. And James D. Kirk does come in and asks, the captain, well, why did you decide to do that? She goes, well, it just seemed to be the best option at the time. She goes, yes, but now everyone on your ship is going to be killed because the Klingons take no prisoners. And we learned that James T. Kirk had to go through the same exercise when he was in the Starfleet Academy, but he was the only one who, they said he had a very unique way of approaching this. And of course, we learn later in the movie what it was. He's faced with this situation where, you have to either let this other ship die, and live with it, or you need to go in with the risk that you'll be attacked. And faced with that situation, he came up with what he thought was the best option. He hacked into the computer and changed the simulation circumstances so that he wasn't faced with that particular dilemma. So what are the rules that you have in your life? Or what are the rules that you have in your health, or in your occupation, or in your finances, or in your spiritual growth, your relationships? What are the rules? And do they really need to be the rules? We can always change the rules just through mutual agreement with other people. And if you think that this isn't a spiritual principle, it is. Jesus taught. Change the rules. In the Gospel of Matthew, 5th chapter, 38th verse, he says, "You have heard that it was said that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's justice. But I say to you, do not resist one who is evil. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the left also. And if anyone would sue you and take your coat, let him take your cloak as well." Sorry about that. Just breathe something in. I remember here this saxophonist talking about, he was playing this song, "When a Man Loves a Woman." He says, "I had to take these deep breaths to play my saxophone. As I'm in the middle of this performance and all these people, and all of a sudden I take a deep breath and I inhale a gnat." He says, "And despite my best efforts, I had to stop and clear my throat." So, as Jesus was saying, and if anyone would take your coat, let him take your shirt as well. And if a Roman soldier forces you to carry his gear for 1 mile, go with him for 2 miles. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. In this next Bible verse, Jesus talks about the law and the prophets. It turns out that the law and the prophets are actually groupings of books that are now in the Old Testament. So whenever Jesus or someone else mentions the law, they're talking like about the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and the prophets are the writings of the prophets. So all of these people were kind of familiar with these various books even before they were gathered into the Hebrew Bible, which we know as the Old Testament, and the New Testament. So in the Gospel of Matthew, 5th chapter, 17th verse, Jesus says, "Think not that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets." And I just pause here a lot because I hear some people characterize it as like, well, Jesus was all about throwing out the Old Testament. Yet he says here, "Think not that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until it is all accomplished." So, are you willing to break out of your preconceived notions of what is possible? Possible for you. Possible for Unity of Tampa. Possible for Florida, the United States, the world. Your visualizations, your thoughts, your prayers add to this human race consciousness that allows us to shift. But you may have noticed, as I have noticed, that the path of human race consciousness is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Don't let that step back discourage you. And number 4 is reality. What a concept, hearkening back to Robin Williams' first recorded stand-up routine. Einstein said, "Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one." The author writes about a woman named Karen Johnson, who is a little girl growing up in New York City, living in the projects with a single mother, would come home and watch the old movies on TV. Just would love the movies from the Golden Age. And she just knew in her heart that that was it. She needed to act. And as she was growing up, she was able to, get into this program in New York City for young kids from underprivileged families, learn how to act. She did that, but then she ended up having a dalliance with a gentleman and ended up getting pregnant. And gave birth to her daughter, and that kind of interrupted her plans a little bit. She was on welfare for a while. She was actually doing child care as a way to make some money. And the person who she was doing child care for moved to San Diego and said, well, if you want to come with, we move to San Diego with us. So she did that and brought her daughter. And out there, eventually she lost that job doing child care, so she laid bricks, did whatever it was she could to make money. But she still always made sure that she set aside a little time each week to be part of a theater troupe. And that's so important. If you love doing something, just find, even if it's an hour a week, to do it. And so she did that. And she was part of an improv group. And suddenly, this person comes to find her after the performance, and he was Mike Nichols, the producer and director. And he says, I've got this one-woman show that you'd be perfect for on Broadway. Would you be willing to do it? And of course, it's like, duh. So she moves to Broadway and is doing this one-person show with Mike Nichols. And it turns out there was another director in the audience who saw her. And here he had been trying to find the right person to cast in this lead role in a movie that he was doing. Now, of course, Steven Spielberg, you think of all of the science fiction stuff, but what he was doing at that point was The Color Purple. And he was trying to cast Seal. So this young woman named Karen Johnson, by that time, had changed her name at the advice of other people. You need something, catchy. She said, the first thing someone was told me is that that the Jewish people are the most successful people in Hollywood. So she figured, okay, a Jewish last name, Goldberg. And then she was trying to come up with a first name, and she saw some kids playing with a toy for a practical joke. They were playing with a whoopee cushion. So that was Whoopi Goldberg. And so that was the way it was launched. So yeah, we all have setbacks at times, but the thing is to really recognize what is a burning passion within you, rather than maybe just a whim that passes through. And what are you willing to do to make sure that you're expressing that special gift in the world? Now, this chapter 9's experiment is the fish and the loaves, and I know some of you are familiar with the Bible story of Jesus. He's got 5,000 people out there. Like, how are we going to feed them? So we'll see who's got what, and it turns out they find 2 fish and 5 loaves. And so Jesus does a prayer over them. And then they distribute the food, and everybody eats till they're filled. And they find 12 baskets full of leftover pieces of bread. Wonderful story on the literal level. And it's interesting, though, that Jesus didn't get all caught up. Oh my God, how are we going to feed 5? Is there a fish market anywhere nearby? But he says, no. And the symbolism of it is, the 2 fish represent divine ideas, and the 5 loaves represent divine substance. And when you combine divine ideas with divine substance, and we have the number 5, which is our 5 senses, all of the needs that we have of our 5 senses here in the physical world are filled. But we just need to trust that Christ consciousness within us is going to lead us and bless us and allow all of that to come together. And we activate divine substance through our belief and through our imagination, being able to see the completed form of what it is we're trying to accomplish. I want to take a moment to mention that after this last chapter of the book, there's actually an afterword, 3 pages, where Pam Grott gives some tips on how to proceed now that you know that the spirituality stuff works. And I guess I could summarize it in one sentence, and that is to seek out like-minded people and spend some time with them at that place. And you've already done that. You found this place at Unity of Tampa. John, if you'll put up the next slide. So this last experiment. Is my focus on negativity keeping me from seeing reality? Because whatever we focus on expands. So if you think the world is a harsh place, yeah, you're going to experience the world as a harsh place. So what it suggests is, rather than look for negativity, look for goodness, beauty, and abundance. Make that what it is you're seeking for the day. And what will happen is you'll see goodness, beauty, and abundance. So set that intention to see these things around you. And notice the good around you everywhere. And Pam suggests, you just kind of keep a notebook with you during the week and just see. And after that, at the end of each day, just express gratitude for your newfound awareness of what's going on around you. And she suggests you just choose a 48-hour period and see what a difference those 2 days are going to be. Our video is from Steve Hartman of the CBS Evening News about a photographer who's helping people adjust their focus and attitude.
46-year-old Richard Rinaldi is looking for someone. Two someones, actually. Two total strangers who were meant to be together.
This is Dominic, right?
If only for a moment.
Okay, so you guys are going to be a couple. They're not exactly sure what they've just signed up for. Actually, and people are a little nervous at first. Okay. I just need you a little closer, okay, good.
Richard is a New York photographer working on a series of portraits.
Okay, good.
For each shot, he grabs strangers off the street, like Jenny Wood, an airline employee from Virginia, and Dominic Tucker, a college student from Brooklyn, and poses them like adoring family.
Beautiful. 1, 2, and 3.
Richard calls the project Touching Strangers. He started shooting it 7 years ago and now has hundreds of portraits of these unlikely intimates. Some of the photos you'd never know they'd never met, while others capture quite well the inherent awkwardness of cuddling some random dude.
Hey, nice meeting you.
Even when the subjects seem eager, their body language often concedes a certain hesitance, at least at first. 10 minutes later, though, it's like Thanksgiving at Aunt Margaret's. And that's the really weird thing.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, Richard puts the people in these poses, but the sentiment that seems to shine through is real. At least, so say the subjects.
Okay.
It was sort of awkward, but then sort of not.
You guys are so good.
We are probably missing so much about the people all around us.
This is Reiko.
At first, Brian Sneeder, a poetry teacher, saw no rhyme or reason for posing with retired fashion designer Reiko Erman.
Can you just come in a little more? Yeah, okay.
But eventually, he too felt a change.
I felt like I cared for her.
Cared for her.
Yeah, I felt like it brought down a lot of bitterness.
Pretty much everyone
It was a good feeling.
shared that same sentiment.
It was nice to feel that comfort.
Everyone seems to come away with kind of a good feeling. It's kind of lovely. It's lovely.
Most photographers capture life as it is. But in these strangers, Richard Rinaldi has captured something much more ethereal and elusive. He shows us humanity as it could be, as most of us wish it would be, and as it was, at least for this one fleeting moment in time. Steve Hartman, on the road in New York.
As I said before, the question to ask is, God, show me the good in this. And you can expand that to, God, show me the good in this person. Closing Bible verse from the Gospel of Matthew, 5th chapter. Think not that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. And may you always be open to God's guidance and grace. Let's prepare for meditation.